Everyone has that certain video game they grew up with that nobody else seems to have ever heard of. Mine was Firepower 2000, which has now gained some exposure since I last talked about it. Not that I had anything to do with that. Luckily, I grew up with another obscure title, Metal Marines, once again for the Super Nintendo. Metal Marines, or Militia if you lived in Japan, is an isometric strategy game developed and published by Namco. The goal is to defeat the opposing army using missiles and large mechas, the titular Metal Marines, all while defending your own base from the enemy forces. Here is where I usually throw in a little development history, but there was absolutely nothing I could find. Sorry. The game begins years after the Antimatter War, in which entire swaths of land were obliterated, leaving only pockets of islands on Earth. The planet's surface is now under control of an evil empire led by the ruthless dictator Zorgiof. You are the commander of the Space Colony's allied forces, tasked with freeing what's left of terrestrial Earth from his tyrannical reign. After initial briefing from allied supporting characters, your first battle awaits. Actual gameplay begins as you entrench your underground bases into an island. Early on, there are allied structures already built, but this lessens as the game progresses. Once placed, the real game starts. The main objectives of each level is to destroy any and all Imperial bases while protecting your own. Offensively, there are two choices, missiles and Metal Marines. Missiles are ideal for reconnaissance at first, as most will be initially picked off by the opposing anti-air missiles. Then you can send in your Metal Marines. When a transport of Marines land, ground combat begins. Wow, is it slow. The Marines plod through the terrain and auto-battle against gun pods and Imperial Marines. There's only a minute available to fight, but the time is almost meaningless. Usually, one side will wipe out the other within the first 30 seconds. There are manual controls, but they are horrible. Under no circumstances is it recommended to use them. Strategically placing the Marines at the start of the ground assault so they prioritize dangerous targets is a much better plan. As slow as the ground combat is when attacking, there is nothing like the eternity of defending. If there are no gun pods or allied Metal Marines in the landing zone, expect every structure to be destroyed. Slowly, and just slow enough for that faint glimmer of hope. But you can at least spare your nerves and abort the battle, self-destructing each and every structure on screen. There's no tactical advantage, but at least you're not staring at the screen, slowly watching your base get torn apart. To avoid this terrible fate, a good mixture of anti-air missiles and gun pods is the best defense. Metal Marines can also be used to augment key areas such as bases. In addition to these standard offensive and defensive units, there are resource buildings that can also be constructed to increase cash flow, generate power used for offensive attacks, hasten building times, or increase your defending missile accuracy. These are often deployed by the enemy as well, so be mindful to take out those targets. The first few levels are expectedly easy and slowly get more difficult with each stage. After 2 levels, the Allied forces successfully liberate the area and move on to continue the campaign. This repeating pattern brings a new look to the levels and rotates through which enemy commander is currently being faced. These enemy commanders are a zany lot. They'll send messages declaring their superiority, and it's charming to see each of them tantrum like a child as their forces are destroyed. Each commander is faced several times, but the outcome is always the same. Nevertheless, the difficulty spikes about halfway through as the enemy sends attack wave after attack wave, with sometimes no chance to react or rebuild. But in case of frustration, it's always easy to return to the same level with a password system that only requires 4 letters. Some are even close to words, making them even easier to remember. See, there's Hobbit, Newton, Jupiter, Nibbler, Phaeton, and okay, later ones less so. There's even a cheat code that can be entered, starting your units with exponentially more money and energy. But don't let those resources fool you. Just because the bank is overflowing doesn't mean you can be lazy. Strategy is still necessary to survive. The isometric view lends itself well for very detailed sprites, as most only need rudimentary animation. The game also isn't bland, with vibrant colors to offset the variety of grays found on most of the units. Cutscenes have an animated style to them that makes one wonder if there were ever plans for any licensed properties. Musically, the game is a bit lacking. There's nothing wrong with the compositions present, but there is no variety as the game goes on. The same few tracks for cutscenes, building, and battle are heard constantly. The one notable thing about the battle theme is how it dynamically changes its tone depending on whether missiles or marines are being utilized. This title was not exclusive to the Super Nintendo. There was also a version made for PC. The game is functionally the same aside from the obviously different graphics, but changes the plot around. Instead of the good guys coming from the space colonies to liberate Earth, the United Earth Empire must defend itself from the relentless assault of Zorgief's space forces. The story is expanded a bit, with a comic prequel included in the manual. The SNES version had no such plot addition. Later, Namco would team with Mindscape for a master edition of the game, upgrading some features for the game and adding voices to the characters.
Welcome to your final battle. This is Bill Garland, commander of the Satellite Colonial Forces.
This game is on the uncommon side, but low demand has kept the price from skyrocketing like most Super Nintendo games. Definitely give this game a try. Even if the later levels get frustrating, the first few levels have great replay value. And you're not missing anything either, as there are no unlockable units added later in the game like most strategy games. Take your time, and you can blow up the enemy with an ICBM right in the first level. Sometimes we don't need to complete a game for a great gaming experience. All that's required is enough fun to keep bringing us back, no matter how much time has passed. Remember, we don't stop gaming because we grow old. We grow old because we stop gaming.